Everyone remembers the 80s as neon lights, synth beats, and kid-friendly cartoons. Big mistake. These 10 animated films from the decade showed blood spraying across the screen, dogs choking in labs, demons raping reality itself, and entire cities melting in nuclear fire, all drawn frame by frame. Some of them were banned on release, and a couple are still restricted or impossible to find legally in several countries today. Buckle up, this isn't Saturday morning TV. At number 10, Rock and Rule. This 1983 Canadian gem, directed by Clive A. Smith, was pitched as a futuristic rock opera set in a post-apocalyptic world where animals have evolved into humanoid rock stars. But beneath the electric guitars and glowing neon aesthetics lies a story that's far from feel-good. We follow Angel, a young singer in a band, as she's targeted by Muck, a megalomaniac rock legend who's obsessed with summoning a demon through music to achieve ultimate power. Muck's plan involves kidnapping, mind control, and literally sucking the life force out of people to fuel his interdimensional portal. The visuals are a wild mix of hand-drawn animation with early CGI elements, creating scenes of body horror where characters morph and dissolve in psychedelic nightmares. Drug references are blatant. Think hallucinogenic trips disguised as concert highs, and the satanic imagery, like pentagrams and soul-devouring rituals, sparked outrage from religious groups. Parents saw it as corrupting youth culture, while censors in conservative markets like parts of the US and Europe either heavily edited it or blocked its release altogether, fearing it promoted occult themes. The film bombed at the box office initially, grossing less than its budget, partly because theaters wouldn't touch it with its mature rating. Yet, it became a cult classic on VHS in the underground scene, influencing later works like heavy metal or even modern stuff like Rick and Morty. What makes it truly controversial is how it subverts the 80s pop culture vibe, turning music, the era's escape, into a tool for apocalyptic destruction. It didn't just cross the line, it electrified it and watched it burn. Number 9. The Plague Dogs. Released in 1982 and based on Richard Adams' novel, the same guy who gave us Watership Down, this British animated feature from Martin Rosen pulls no punches in his portrayal of animal suffering. The story centers on two dogs, Ralph, a tough Labrador who's been subjected to endless drowning experiments in water tanks, and Snitter, a fox terrier driven half-mad by brain surgery that leaves him hallucinating and confused. They break out of a secretive government research facility in the Lake District, only to face a brutal wilderness where they're hunted as plague carriers, a rumor spread by the media to cover up the lab's horrors. The animation style is stark and realistic, with detailed depictions of emaciated bodies, infected wounds, and graphic deaths. Dogs shot point blank, falling off cliffs, or starving in the rain-swept moors. There's no anthropomorphic cuteness here. These animals don't talk in funny voices. Their dialogue is raw, philosophical, questioning the ethics of human science. The atmosphere is relentlessly oppressive, with long silences broken by howling winds, echoing gunshots, and Snitter's delusional rants about the whitecoats and their tortures. Upon release, it aired on TV in the UK and US during the 80s, leading to a flood of complaints from parents whose kids stumbled upon it thinking it was a pet adventure like Lady and the Tramp. Schools that screened it for anti-vivisection lessons face backlash for traumatizing students, and in countries like Australia and parts of Europe, it was reclassified or outright banned from broadcast due to its anti-establishment message against animal testing and government secrecy. Even the voice acting, featuring legends like John Hurt, adds to the emotional gut punch, making viewers feel the dog's despair. Decades later, animal rights groups still cite it as a powerful indictment, but back then, it was seen as too bleak for animation, a medium supposed to entertain, not evoke existential dread. This isn't just a story of escape, it's a haunting elegy for the voiceless victims of progress. Number 8. Heavy Metal. This 1981 anthology film is basically the animated equivalent of a late-night adult magazine crossed with a thrash metal album.
Directed by Gerald Potterton and produced by Ivan Reitman, it's a collection of short stories adapted from the Heavy Metal magazine, all linked by a glowing green orb called the Lochnar that corrupts and destroys everything it touches. Each segment is wildly different in style and tone, but the common thread is extreme violence, graphic nudity, and unapologetic sexuality. One story has a New York cabbie turn into a cyborg who slaughters his way through a dystopian future. Another follows a softcore spaceship captain who gets seduced and killed by a green-skinned alien woman in a full frontal sex scene that lasts minutes. There's a fantasy tale where a barbarian girl is raped and then fights back with a sword through hordes of monsters. And the infamous Dense segment features a teenage boy transported to a fantasy world where he becomes a muscular adult and has explicit sex with a topless warrior woman, complete with bouncing anatomy drawn in loving detail. The soundtrack is stacked with 80s hard rock legends: Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Devo, Nazareth, Cheap Trick, blasting over every explosion, decapitation, and orgasm. Upon release, it was immediately slapped with an R rating in the US and equivalents elsewhere, but that didn't stop parents from losing their minds when kids rented the VHS thinking it was just another cartoon. In the UK, Australia, and several European countries, certain scenes were heavily cut or the film was banned outright from home video until later uncut editions emerged. Religious groups called it satanic propaganda, feminists criticized the objectification, and moral watchdogs labeled it a gateway to depravity. Even today, it's still cited as one of the most sexually explicit mainstream animated features ever released in the West. Heavy Metal didn't just push boundaries, it obliterated them, then snorted the rubble and kept going.
Number 7. When the Wind Blows. Number 7. When the Wind Blows. Directed by Jimmy T. Murakami and based on Raymond Briggs' graphic novel, this 1986 British film is one of the most quietly devastating pieces of animation ever made. It follows Jim and Hilda Bloggs, a sweet, elderly, very British couple living in a rural cottage as they prepare for and then endure a full-scale nuclear war between NATO and the Soviet Union. The couple are relics of World War II. Jim still believes in government pamphlets and keep calm and carry on, while Hilda trusts the radio and the idea that a quick duck and cover will save them. They build a shelter under their dining table, paint the windows white, stockpile canned food, and cheerfully discuss how the Russians will be beaten just like the Germans were. Then the bomb drops. The screen flashes white. The house is wrecked. Radiation sickness sets in slowly and mercilessly. Their hair falls out, skin blisters. They vomit blood. They grow weaker by the hour, still clinging to outdated 1940s survival tips that do absolutely nothing against fallout. The animation is soft, watercolor-like, almost gentle, which makes the horror even more unbearable. There are no explosions or monsters, just two old people slowly dying in a poisoned world they can't comprehend. The soundtrack features a haunting Roger Waters song and a bleak, droning score that never lets you forget the hopelessness. When it premiered, it was shown in schools across the UK as part of Cold War education programs, but many teachers and parents were horrified by how graphic the radiation effects were depicted. In the US, it received limited theatrical release and was later aired on PBS, sparking massive viewer complaints about traumatizing children. Several countries restricted its broadcast or gave it the highest possible adult rating. Anti-nuclear groups praised it as a powerful statement, while others accused it of being defeatist propaganda. Decades later, it's still used in peace studies classes, but back in the 80s, it was seen as too depressing, too realistic, and too terrifying for something drawn with gentle brushstrokes. When the Wind Blows doesn't scream, it whispers your extinction, and that whisper stays with you forever. Number 6. Akira. Directed by Katsuhiro Otomo and released in 1988, this Japanese masterpiece is widely regarded as one of the most influential animated films ever made and one of the most violently censored in the West. Set in a sprawling dystopian Neo-Tokyo in 2019, the story follows a teenage biker gang whose leader, Tetsuo, gains uncontrollable psychic powers after a government experiment goes wrong. What starts as street fights and juvenile rebellion explodes into full-body horror. Tetsuo's flesh mutates grotesquely, his limbs swell and burst, his body devours itself and everything around him in a cascade of blood, bone, and biomechanical nightmares.
Buildings collapse in massive explosions. Crowds are torn apart by telekinetic waves. One of the most infamous scenes shows Tetsuo's arm transforming into a writhing mass of flesh and metal that engulfs and crushes a man alive. The film doesn't hold back on gore. Heads explode, bodies are ripped in half, and the final transformation sequence is a psychedelic orgy of destruction that looks like a living tumor consuming the city. The animation is breathtaking, fluid, detailed, cinematic, with groundbreaking use of lighting, perspective, and speed lines that made Western studios look primitive by comparison. But that same intensity got it into trouble. In the US and Europe, theatrical releases were heavily cut, sometimes by 20 to 30 minutes, to remove the most graphic violence, dismemberment, and body horror. Certain countries like Germany and the UK initially refused an uncut version, slapping it with 18+ ratings or delaying home video release for years. Parents and moral guardians were appalled that something this brutal was being called a cartoon. Even in Japan, it shocked audiences used to anime, but the West treated it like a snuff film disguised as animation. Akira didn't just cross lines, it redefined what animation could show, forcing the world to confront that cartoons could contain more visceral terror than most live-action horror. 35 years later, it's still studied, revered, and occasionally censored in edited TV broadcasts. This is the film that proved anime wasn't just for kids anymore. It could be apocalyptic. Number 5. Gandahar, also known as Light Years. This 1987 French animated sci-fi epic, directed by René Laloux, the mind behind Fantastic Planet, takes place on the utopian planet Gandahar, a paradise of organic architecture, floating islands, and peaceful blue-skinned humanoids living in perfect harmony with nature. That harmony is shattered when metallic invaders from the future, revealed to be corrupted descendants of the Gandaharians themselves, arrive to conquer and destroy. What makes the film so disturbing is its blend of breathtaking beauty and profound existential horror. The visuals are surreal and dreamlike. Enormous flower-like structures, translucent creatures, bodies that merge with plants, and landscapes that feel alive and breathing. But underneath the beauty lies rot, sexual undertones in the designs, phallic towers, vulvic openings, writhing tentacles, philosophical pessimism about progress, and scenes of graphic transformation where characters are absorbed, melted, or turned into metallic abominations. One particularly unsettling sequence shows peaceful villagers being liquefied and reformed into obedient drones, their faces frozen in silent screams. The film questions whether utopia is possible or if decay is inevitable, delivering a slow burn despair that feels more like a warning than a story. Laloux's previous work was already controversial, but Gandahar pushed further with its mature themes, implied incestuous undertones and family dynamics, body horror that rivals Cronenberg, and the nihilistic view of technology and evolution. Distribution was limited almost everywhere outside France. Art house theaters only, tiny runs, and almost no marketing. In conservative markets, it was either ignored or quietly shelved due to the sexual imagery and bleak worldview. Some country censors flagged it as too adult, too disturbing, or too ideologically subversive for general audiences. Even today, it remains obscure, hard to find in good quality, and rarely discussed outside animation history circles. Gandahar isn't loud or fast. It's hypnotic, seductive, and quietly apocalyptic. It lures you in with beauty, then drowns you in the realization that paradise always carries the seeds of its own destruction. Number 4. The Black Cauldron. This 1985 Disney film remains one of the darkest, most controversial entries in the studio's entire history, and one of the biggest commercial disasters they ever produced. Directed by Ted Berman and Richard Rich, it's a loose adaptation of Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain novels, set in a medieval fantasy world where the evil Horned King seeks the Black Cauldron, a magical artifact that can raise an unstoppable army of the undead. What makes this film so shocking, especially coming from Disney, is how far it goes into horror territory. The Horned King himself is terrifying, a skeletal figure in a hooded cloak with glowing red eyes and antler-like horns, whose skeletal army of cauldron-born zombies claw their way out of the ground in grotesque, writhing masses. There are scenes of outright violence, characters stabbed, crushed, or dissolved into green mist. One particularly brutal moment shows the Horned King's undead minions tearing through villages, with implied mass slaughter. The protagonist, Taryn, witnesses a friend being seemingly killed in a sacrificial ritual, and the cauldron itself is activated by blood. The tone is relentlessly grim. Long stretches of darkness, oppressive fog, eerie green lighting, and a score that feels more like a horror movie than a family adventure. Disney executives were so alarmed by early cuts that they demanded heavy edits. Several death scenes were softened, a major character's death was cut entirely, and the ending was made less bleak. Even then, upon release, parents were outraged. This was supposed to be Disney, the safe brand for kids, yet children came out of theaters crying or having nightmares. The film bombed spectacularly, losing the studio millions and nearly bankrupting the animation division. It was pulled from theaters quickly, rarely re-released theatrically, and for years was barely aired on TV or home video in many countries. In the UK and parts of Europe, it received higher age ratings than typical Disney fare, and some broadcasters refused to show it at all during family hours. Even today, Disney treats it like an embarrassment. It's one of the few animated features from the era that hasn't gotten a proper Blu-ray restoration or wide digital push until recently. The Black Cauldron proved that even the House of Mouse could produce something too dark, too violent, and too scary for its own family-friendly image, and paid a heavy price for daring to try.
Number 3. Fist of the North Star and Violence Jack. The mid to late 80s in Japan saw an explosion of hyper-violent anime, and these two stand as the most notorious examples. First, the 1986 Fist of the North Star theatrical film and its TV series that ran 1984 to 1987 but peaked in infamy during the movie era, follows Kenshido, a wandering martial artist in a post-apocalyptic wasteland who uses Hokuto Shinken, a deadly pressure point style that makes enemies' bodies explode from the inside. The signature move? You are already dead. Victims scream, clutch their chests, and then erupt in fountains of blood, limbs flying, heads bursting like overripe fruit. Scenes show bandits getting their faces caved in, spines ripped out, or entire gangs detonating in slow-motion gore. The animation is dynamic and brutal, exaggerated muscle flexing, speed lines, extreme close-ups on exploding flesh. It was so graphic that international releases were heavily censored. In the US, Europe, and Australia, entire episodes or scenes were cut, voices redubbed to remove screams, and blood was recolored or removed. Some countries outright banned episodes or the movie from TV and video. Then there's Violence Jack, Go Nagai's even darker OVA series starting in 1986. Set in a Mad Max-style hellscape after earthquakes and nuclear war, it follows the towering, muscle-bound Violence Jack who fights, and often rapes and mutilates, demonic gangs, mutants, and warlords. The violence is cartoonishly extreme but depicted with stomach-churning detail. Decapitations with bare hands, bodies sliced in half lengthwise, mass rape scenes, women crucified and tortured, children killed on screen. One episode features a woman being torn apart alive while conscious. The OVAs were never meant for mainstream audiences. They were sold directly to adult video stores in Japan. But when bootlegs and imports hit the West, authorities reacted hard. In the UK and Germany, copies were seized and destroyed under obscenity laws. In the US, it became a symbol of video nasties in anime form. Both franchises shocked even hardened anime fans and cemented the 80s as the decade when Japanese animation discovered it could go further into gore and depravity than almost any other medium. They weren't just violent, they reveled in it, turning cartoon violence into something almost pornographic in its excess.
To this day, uncut versions of Violence Jack are still hard to find legally in many countries, and Fist of the North Star's TV run remains edited in several markets. These weren't cartoons, they were bloodbaths drawn with love and precision.
Number 2. Urotsukidoji, Legend of the Overfiend. This infamous Japanese OVA series, starting in 1987 and continuing into 1989, is widely considered the most extreme and notorious example of animated horror erotica ever produced. Directed by Hideki Takayama and based on Toshio Maeva's manga, it blends Lovecraftian cosmic horror with graphic, boundary-shattering pornography in a way that still shocks viewers today. The story revolves around the Chojin, an apocalyptic demon child born from the union of human, demon, and beast realms, destined to trigger the end of the world through endless sexual violence. The protagonist, Tatsuo, is unknowingly this being, and every time he has sex, tentacles erupt from his body, raping and mutilating everyone around him in increasingly grotesque ways. Scenes include women being penetrated and torn apart by writhing tentacles, bodies exploding from internal pressure, mass orgies that end in dismemberment, pregnant women giving birth to monsters mid-rape, and entire cities consumed in apocalyptic sex-fueled destruction. The animation is detailed and fluid, with loving close-ups on every penetration, gush of fluid, and splatter of blood and viscera. What separates it from typical hentai is the sheer scale of the horror. It's not just sex, it's cosmic annihilation through sex. Demons, gods, and humans all reduced to screaming, bleeding meat in a ritual of eternal violation. Upon release in Japan, it was sold only through adult video specialty shops, but when bootleg tapes and imports flooded the West in the late 80s and early 90s, it became a lightning rod for censorship. In the UK, under the Video Recordings Act, copies were seized and destroyed as obscene material. In the US, customs officials confiscated shipments, and several states treated possession as a felony-level obscenity offense. Germany, Australia, and Canada banned it outright or classified it as prohibited. Even in Japan, some editions were edited to remove the most extreme sequences. The series gained a dark legend status. People whispered about the anime that got people arrested, and it became a symbol of why anime was dangerous. To this day, fully uncut versions remain difficult or impossible to obtain legally in many countries. Streaming platforms won't touch it, physical releases are gray market only, and it's still cited in discussions of media obscenity laws. Urotsukidōji didn't just cross every line, it erased them, then used the ashes to draw new, even darker ones. This is the film that made the world realize animation could be weaponized as pure, unrelenting taboo. Number 1. Watership Down. Although originally released in 1978, this British animated adaptation of Richard Adams' novel truly earned its legendary status and its infamy during the 1980s when it was repeatedly aired on television in the UK, US, Australia, and elsewhere, traumatizing an entire generation of children who tuned in expecting a cute bunny movie. Directed by Martin Rosen, the film follows a group of rabbits fleeing the destruction of their warren after one of them, Fiver, has a prophetic vision of doom. What unfolds is a brutal survival saga filled with realistic animal violence. Rabbits are snared and strangled, throats ripped out in slow-motion close-ups, bodies crushed under machinery, drowned in floods, shot by farmers, and torn apart in territorial battles. The infamous scene where Bigwig is caught in a wire snare shows him slowly suffocating, blood trickling from his mouth, eyes bulging in agony. Another sequence depicts the genocidal assault on the Ephraim Warren, with rabbits being clubbed, stabbed, and buried alive. The animation is painterly and naturalistic, no big eyes or funny voices, making the deaths feel disturbingly real. The score by Angela Morley and Art Garfunkel's haunting Bright Eyes only deepens the melancholy and despair. When it started appearing on TV in the early to mid-80s, often in afternoon or early evening slots, parents were blindsided.
Kids who loved Bugs Bunny turned on the TV and watched rabbits being graphically murdered. Complaints flooded broadcasters. The BBC and ITV in the UK received thousands of letters from furious parents. In the US, Nickelodeon and other channels aired edited versions, but uncut broadcasts still happened. Schools that showed it for literature classes faced backlash for showing animal cruelty to children. Several countries and regions gave it higher age certifications than initially expected, 12 or 15 in some places, and in Australia it was restricted or required warnings. Even Disney fans were shocked that something this bleak could be animated. The 80s became the decade when Watership Down entered the cultural lexicon as shorthand for the cartoon that scarred me for life. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, and forums are still full of people in their 30s to 50s describing how it gave them nightmares about rabbits and death. It remains one of the most complained about broadcasts in TV history. Watership Down didn't just push boundaries, it shattered the illusion that animation is inherently safe, proving that a story about rabbits could be more harrowing than any slasher film. And decades later, it still does.
The 80s gave us synthwave dreams, and these nightmares in animation. Films that were banned, cut, buried, yet they still haunt us. Which one scarred you the most? Drop it in the comments. If you survived this list, hit subscribe for more dark corners of animation history. See you in the next one, if you dare.